Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video. I'm here with the 2022 Kia EV6. Now, this is the rear-wheel drive Wind edition. So Wind is sort of their middle tier between the Lite and the GT. This has the bigger 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack. Now this car comes in at almost $49,000 MSRP. But you get a lot of car for the money. This is kind of in its own category in terms of what you can get for the price. And the best I can describe this car as is sitting somewhere between a Tesla Model 3 and a Ford Mustang Mach-E. Now, the obvious, of course, comparison is the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which is built on the same eGMP platform using the same battery, power electronics, and everything else. So that is a very much a direct competitor with this vehicle, but those are almost sister companies. And really, if you're going to choose between this and the Hyundai Ioniq 5, it's going to be very subtle differences in terms of efficiency and design aesthetics. But those design aesthetics can actually have some serious impacts, and there's some things I'm going to call out about this EV6 that might not actually be an issue with the Ioniq 5. Though this does have some unique aspects in its favor. In particular, this does offer a Wi-Fi hotspot using the Verizon network, which will allow people in rural areas to get internet through their car, or if you're traveling or vacationing. But in terms of comparison and sort of setting a class, my familiarity with the Ford Mustang Mach-E and the Tesla Model 3 are, what would allow me to do the most direct comparison. What you end up with is a very similar price class, though the Tesla Model 3 doesn't offer a rear-wheel drive trim in the same way as this, but the Ford Mustang Mach-E that compares most closely to this is probably the California Route 1 edition. There's some obvious differences with the way these cars manage their energy and charge, which I think leans favorably for this Kia EV6. So let's go into the different aspects of the car, the interior, the exterior, the handling, the performance, and the EV specific aspects of this Kia EV6, and just see how it compares with everything in its class. One of the things that makes the Kia EV6 so hard to classify is that it really sits somewhere between a sedan and a crossover, but it's very much more a sedan than a crossover, both in appearance and, for better or worse, some of the interior functionality and features. For example, the seating position is a cockpit style. I've come to appreciate sitting a little bit higher up with a little bit better visibility that comes with a more traditional crossover. And in addition, the B-pillar really does block out a lot of the blind spot. Now, the Kia EV6 does come with a lot of safeguards in terms of proximity alerts and blind spot warnings, but it's still a little bit unnerving to look over your shoulder and not be able to actually see your blind spot because the B-pillar is so thick. However, despite being a sedan, the EV6 is actually very easy to get in and out of, much easier than other sedans of similar size and configuration. The vegan leather perforated seats were very comfortable. I didn't really have a chance to use the heated element, but I feel like you use one heated seat, you'll use them all. But because of how hot it was when I was reviewing the EV6, I did have a chance to use the ventilated seats, and that was actually a welcome surprise. They are very cooling, and in fact, I could only really keep it on the lowest setting after a while. And one more thing about the seats, in addition to being ventilated and heated, is they are power adjustable with memory set for the driver's seat. So there are actually two selected memories for the driver's seat. One feature that I thought I was not going to like very much was touchscreen controls for the climate control as well as the radio. And I really didn't find it an issue at all to switch back and forth. You know kind of what you're looking to do, so you just have to make sure you either select the climate control feature or the radio feature, and I didn't really have an issue with that, especially with things like climate control where you are kind of setting it once and maybe adjusting it along the way. And with the radio, I was making most of those adjustments through the infotainment screen. Kia decided to provide the EV6 with a single piece screen that works as both the DIC and as the infotainment screen. And I think this works, though it seems almost unnecessary because there's a constant break in the screen where there really isn't any information displayed. So I don't know if this was necessarily the best use of Kia's resources, but it looked pretty cool. Kia provided a lot of information for the EV6, the different drive modes, everything else. And one thing, of course, that I really look for in EVs is having the battery displayed in an actual percentage. The one thing that Kia omitted from the EV6's DIC that I really would have liked to see is an actual power input and output rating. Now, yes, they do provide a little charging graphic. It seems like the same exact one that they were using on the Niro EV as well. I don't think they need to overthink that. It's simple. It provides kilowatt, provides battery percentage, provides estimates to 80% or full. All of that is fine. But when you're actually driving, I'd like to know how much power output there is and how much power coming in there is from the regenerative braking. It's just something that's nice to see on screen. It is graphically represented, but it's always nice to see some hard numbers associated with that. For the rest of the interior materials, Kia went with something akin to almost like a hard denim on the dash, which adds a nice bit of texture to the inside of the vehicle and a little bit of a color change. The DIC and the infotainment screen are vertical, which does cut down on glare, which is also very nice. Again, this is a cockpit configuration, so you have a fairly large console area in between the driver and the passenger in the front. They have the wireless phone charger right next to the driver, and I somewhat worry about that adding to some distraction because you can still look at and see the phone and even interact with your phone while it's charging while you're driving. The dial drive selector isn't my favorite configuration. I still prefer either a stock shifter like they use in the Tesla or a push button selector. The rear of the Kia EV6 is a very comfortable place to be. So Kia made sure that they included rear vents. Now they're in a slightly different place. They're in the B-pillar, and that could speak to why the B-pillars are a little bit wider than maybe they are in other competing EVs. And again, that does negatively affect the visibility, but for rear passenger comfort, I think having that ventilation is absolutely necessary. There are also USB plugs in the sides of the front seats that are accessible to the rear passengers, and there is also a power output from the car's inverter below those rear passenger seats. But overall, like I said, it's just a very comfortable place to be, a very comfortable place to sit. If you pop the trunk, and it is a power lift and power closed trunk, which is a really nice option to have, especially for people who are going to struggle to pull it down. When I closed that trunk lid without using the power assist, it was quite heavy. The dampers were a struggle to pull down. So it's nice to have that power assist to close it as well. There's a decent amount of space in the rear of the EV6 given that it's a sedan format, and they do have interesting levers that you pull to kick forward the rear seats to add that additional cargo capacity. One thing I did not like about those levers is when I did open those seats, they seemed to lock down in place, and it seemed like it was necessary to pull the lever again just to lift the seat up. It's not well positioned ergonomically, and it's very awkward to try and pull that lever while lifting those rear seats back into positions. And with the rear seats kicked down, the Kia EV6 has 50 cubic feet of cargo capacity, which puts it, squarely in the middle of its class. Comparing it to something like the Tesla Model 3, it has significantly more seat down rear cargo capacity, but it's about 10 cubic feet less than the Ford Mustang Mach-E. Now, in addition to the efficiency for driving, one of the main reasons I was so excited about getting the Kia EV6 rear-wheel drive Wind Edition was that because there is no front motor on the rear-wheel drive, obviously, EV6, the front has more room for cargo capacity in theory, so there could be a larger front compartment. Unfortunately, on this EV6, it was using the same front compartment that's found in the all-wheel drive EV6, and you can just tell from looking at it, there's a significant amount of space below it that's not being used for anything. And that's really unfortunate because they could have easily added probably enough room for a single travel carry-on bag, or maybe just a small duffel bag, or, you know, a significant amount of knickknacks, paddywhacks, and dog bones. But the fact is that this EV6 Wind rear-wheel drive that I had that same limitation of a super small frunk that is the same as what you would get in the all-wheel drive. But Kia, I don't know if it was a parts shortage, but if you have it available, I would suggest customizing a slightly larger frunk and make it available to your EV6 rear-wheel drive owners, because I think that's going to be a welcome upgrade in terms of just having extra storage. In terms of driver assist features, the EV6 has adaptive cruise control system, both a lane keep assist and lane centering. It does a very, very good job of keeping you centered in their lane. There's no ping-ponging anything else, whereas just the lane keep assist is more basic and what I would expect, though frankly it's a little bit more intrusive than I would like. Now, I had a lot of criticisms when I reviewed the Kia Niro EV, the 2019 Kia EV, both about the adaptive cruise control and phantom braking, as well as there was some weird steering. I don't know if I want to call it phantom steering, where I would drive by brakes in the side of the road and the Niro EV would actually try to jerk the steering wheel out of my hands. And that's kind of disconcerting when you're traveling at freeway speeds. And I didn't notice any of that with the EV6. Well, I should say there was only one time where the adaptive cruise control broke harder than I thought was appropriate, given that the car in front of me was exiting the freeway. But outside of that, pretty much all of the issues that I had with the Niro EV appear to have been addressed, fixed, and corrected in the EV6. So kudos to Kia for that. And one thing that I was concerned with getting into a rear-wheel drive EV6 is something that I had heard from other auto reviewers, that they really didn't like how it handled compared to the all-wheel drive. However, I really couldn't see anything that they were complaining about. I'm sure that the all-wheel drive has a lot more power than the rear-wheel drive. The rear-wheel drive EV6 is lower in power than the Mustang Mach-E Route 1 that I've driven, but it actually didn't feel any slower and any less nimble, just because despite being down on power, the EV6 also weighs about 500 pounds less than the Mustang Mach-E Route 1. So I found it very drivable, peppy, but not powerful. The one criticism that I have, I don't know if this is possible, but I would love to see the sport mode actually change the steering ratio. I'd really like to see them tighten it up so it's a lot fewer turns lock to lock, and I think that would completely change the driving dynamics of the rear-wheel drive EV6 in terms of curvy roads and in just engaging performance driving. That would be my one criticism for the car. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot I would change for a daily driver. Now, in terms of efficiency for the EV6, I was able to take it on some fairly long drives, and I'll have some videos of that in the future, including a 1,000-kilometer or 621.4 mile run. That maybe wasn't as exciting as it could have been thanks to Memorial Day traffic, but the car handled really well on a road trip, and the efficiency, I don't say it surprised me, but I wasn't let down. It basically performed exactly how I expected it to, and I've driven that route enough, and I know at those speeds what kind of efficiency I should be seeing in those types of conditions. So based on what I saw driving at 70 to 75 miles an hour, the Kia EV6 Wind Edition rear-wheel drive had similar efficiency to the Tesla Model 3 all-wheel drive in non-aero wheels. So expect about 3.3, maybe 3.4 miles per kilowatt hour in just baseline conditions driving at 70, 75 miles an hour. That's a pretty good estimate based on what I was seeing. Initially, I was tracking nearly 280 miles on a full charge, but conditions switched a little bit and that started to drop. So I would say that in normal conditions, I would feel comfortable driving the EV6 on the 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack about 250 miles on a full charge. That would be about the limit of what I would set as my first charging stop goal or waypoint on a trip. But that's really good, and that's a lot of driving. I think people forget sometimes that you're on the road for 3 to 4 hours sometimes before the car actually needs to stop to charge. And after traveling with this car, I can say that the one aspect of it is that it feels like this is that baseline for EV requirements. You're no longer having to build your trips around the needs of the car. You're able to build your trip around your needs as a driver and just sort of fit in the charging as you need to go, as you need to travel, because this car is best in class in terms of its EV-specific performance. But I want to use that to segue into the other aspect of that is the charging. Because the EV6 charges so quickly, it's possible to make 5 to 10 to 15 minute bathroom stops at even a 150 kilowatt charger and add an hour or more of driving range. Now, again, by gas standards, that doesn't sound like much, but how many times have you been driving in a gas car and decided you needed to use the bathroom and pulled over for 5 minutes and then got back on the road again? Well, this is like doing that and getting a free 3 or 4 gallons of gas at the same time, right? It's no longer, you have to change the way that you look at traveling with an EV, but in the case of the EV6, it actually travels faster than I would normally travel. And so what that means is you can feel free to take a meal stop somewhere. In fact, with the EV6, I would recommend, if you do want to stop for a meal, find a location that has 100 to 125 kilowatt chargers. Those are about the right speed for the EV6 to sit there for about 30 to 45 minutes while you're sitting down, eating a meal, relaxing, just taking your time, taking a breather before you get back on the road again. And it's about perfect. Even a 50 kilowatt charger isn't bad. Now, of course, if you have the option, use a 350 kilowatt charger. Now, because again, Memorial Day and not all of Electrify America's 350 kilowatt chargers are 350 kilowatt, and they only have a couple of them per site. Most of the charging that I did was on 150 kilowatt chargers, and that was still remarkably fast. I had to go out of my way to use a 350 kilowatt charger, and this beast of a car went from 20% to nearly 90% battery in 24 minutes on a 350 kilowatt EVgo charger. The thing was absolutely insane with how fast it charged and how long it held that charge. And I would also say, because of that 800 volt charging system in the EV6, you don't necessarily have to shy away from the 150 kilowatt chargers because they are also very, very fast. In fact, I was seeing speeds of up to 170 kilowatts on a 150 kilowatt charger. I had no problem driving over 700 miles on Memorial Day, and most of my charging sessions were on 150 kilowatt chargers, and many of them were only 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes at most, before I was back on the road again. Now, while I like just about everything about the Kia EV6's charging, the one thing that I'm really not a huge fan of is the charging port itself. Now, where Kia chose to place the charging port on the EV6 is actually very different from where they typically placed charging ports in the past. For example, the Kia Soul EV and the Kia Niro EV both have charging ports in the front, and I think that is a much more desirable location. The location is a problem because it requires extra work to fit into most parking spaces, because you end up having to do a 2 or a 3 point turn in a parking lot, sometimes a busy parking lot, in order to navigate backward into the charging stall. It's much easier to just pull into a charging stall, and when you're done, back out again. Also, the EV6's CCS charging port comes with a plug style DC pin cover. Now, my preference is to have a flange cover that's much easier to open, stays in place. It stays where it's supposed to be, right? You don't have to worry about it. Also, what I found with the Kia EV6 is that the charge port was very dark during nighttime, and there is an LED on it. However, because the LED is on the same surface as the socket itself, it doesn't actually light the black CCS charging port at nighttime. At least it doesn't illuminate it in a way that you can easily see the plug for plugging in. So I'd love to see Kia add some sort of an LED to light this socket where it's actually facing directly toward the socket rather than embedded into the same surface as the socket, just to make it easier to see. Now, I know I'm nitpicking here quite a bit because these are all just little things that I like to see as small improvements to the CCS charging port, but also I would be remiss if I did not mention something else that both Kia and Hyundai are doing with their eGMP platforms. It appears that they have bi-directional onboard chargers, and this allows you to plug an adapter into the actual J1772 socket and then draw up to 1.7 kilowatts of power directly from the battery. Now, I don't want to say that this is a gimmick, because it really is a useful feature, but I don't know that it's necessarily any better than simply having a built-in inverter. Maybe it saves on some hardware costs, and it saves on wear and tear on the DC to DC converter, because traditional EV inverters that you draw power from the 12-volt battery, which then has to be recharged from the DC to DC converter that's connected to the battery. So this does create a slightly more efficient operation, puts less wear and tear on, and reduces the parts. But overall, as far as the end consumer is concerned, I don't know that they'll notice the difference. So overall, I'm super excited about the Kia EV6. There are some small things that I would change here or there. One thing that I noticed is Kia did use remarkably large tires. We're talking truck SUV sized tires on the EV6. And even this rear wheel drive, it isn't staggered, but 235/55 on a 19-inch rim. These are massive tires. I think Kia could save both themselves and their owners a decent amount of money by downsizing those tires just a little bit, or at least downsizing the rims. It's really expensive to replace 19-inch tires. It's still not what I would consider a standard rim size. So you might want to consider doing what Ford did with the Mach-E, where they used a smaller rim size on the Route 1 to save weight and to save basically money. So I would say that might be something that Kia, again, wants to look into, especially for something like this middle trim EV6 Wind, where it's not the full GT line. Save those 19-inch rims for the GT line or the performance cars, but give us that middle tier, maybe a nice 18-inch rim, and call it a day. Save us a few $100s each time we have to replace tires on the car. Save us a few $100s just at the outset buying the car. But again, outside of that, like I said, the EV6, super impressive. I don't think you can go wrong. Even at that high price point of, the mid to high 40,000s, it's a great value for a road tripping car, and it could easily replace anybody's gasoline powered car as their primary car for a household, right? And you could still road trip across the country in a day or two. It's really that impressive in terms of its capability, charging, and its range and its functionality. So I'm excited to see these available now. All right, well, I hope that was helpful. I hope it was useful. an informative review that helps you decide on whether this is the right car for you. If you have any questions, of course, put them in the comments section below. And yeah, there's a lot of resources out there for the EV6, seeing a lot of them on the road. It's a great car, and I'm looking forward to seeing more from Kia in terms of what they're offering in terms of electric vehicles, their eGMP platform, how it's going to integrate into their other vehicles. Some of the infotainment and their design cues are going into things like the Kia Niro EV. So these are all positive things to see. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and thank you for watching.